Although what they'll see is whatever the two of you would like to look at today as well, because as I go through, I'll make sure that we connect with the resources that are specific to what you're really looking to find today. Of course, we're looking at the multiple modalities today. Also, three-dimensional learning, we'll make a couple of connections with that and the overall Amplify science approach. But as I'm doing that, as I mentioned, you'll see I'm going through some standard things. But if you have questions with it being just us, feel free to stop me and to ask at that time. No problem whatsoever. And I'll try to, even if I have to navigate to another place or something like that, that should be fine. Just want to make sure that you're connected with the resources that you want to be connected with. I will say that for the most part, the workshop, this one is really designed for those who have either taught Amplify a little bit or maybe had the orientation workshop or some form of orientation. And I say that only because if you notice that I'm jumping from place to place and you're like, that's just going in a place that you're not familiar with or you're not as comfortable with navigating yet or things like that, just let me know. And I can also make sure that I'm more deliberate when I'm looking for the resources too. So I don't want you to think that I'm just rushing through it or anything like that. It's just I'm kind of thinking about the time that we're going to use and getting into the resources. But I would also be more than happy to navigate through things as well. You're both more than welcome to, like, if you want to talk, to come off mute and to talk and all that good stuff. But if you also feel more comfortable, because sometimes even when it is a smaller group, you feel more comfortable with chat, feel free to use the chat as well. And you'll notice that I'll also go past a couple things that might have been more of a starter or an icebreaker that we would have had if we had several other people. But instead of using, like we have Jamboard and things like that, we might just use the chat today since it's only a couple of us. As you can see there, being able to get into your Amplify account would be very helpful at this point. So if you can do that and have your windows split, meaning the Zoom window in one place and then over on the other side of the screen, perhaps your Amplify account, that would be great. If you have issues with accessing the account, let me know and we can send you a couple things to help you with we have the review site, the demo site. I am hoping that you're both able to access your accounts at this time. And if you have any issues with that, though, definitely let us know. And then, of course, just the participant notebook, if you would like to use it. Again, it might be one of those things that you kind of read through, and then you might use it as a model, but you might not use it for the actual note-taking itself. So I'll keep that in mind. And that's no problem. I cannot access it yet. Let's go ahead and take a moment to make sure that we have what we need for this. I am going to send a message that's found on our resource site. And I'm going to put that into chat. And when you open it up, you will see the message. I'm going to open it up in the window over here in just a second so we can all look at it. This is where you're going to find that demo account that you can use today that should be open. So right now, all of us in a different situation. It could be that the rosters aren't finalized in STARS yet, and therefore the information hasn't been shared with Clever, so you're not able to access your account. But until that time, here is an account that you can utilize. You will just go to the learning.amplify.com and you can use this username and this password. Now, if you know your account's working, then please use that account. If not, go ahead and download this document. Make sure that you have this. You can just go over here and download it. Make sure you have that. That might be something you want to share with your administrators, with other teachers on campus. These accounts will be open until October 31st. But beyond that, our messages on here, as you can see from 921, that if you are having trouble, that we're directing you to contact core curriculum with any issues you're having with your account. And then it gives some more information about, it's more straightforward about how this works with STARS and finalizing that. So if you pass that along to whoever's working with your rosters and STARS, then that should also, that will lead to you being able to access your account a little bit faster. Because once you do have everything finalized, you're not going to be sent any type of credentials or anything like that. Instead, you find your login on the resource site, and you'll both log in, or you'll all log in at the same time. And I'm just going off of what Marguerite said. You might, it might be that the account is active right now, is what I was about to say, and you're just not able to get into it, or you haven't been able to try it. So I will show you really quickly, just so you know. Oh yeah, absolutely. On the resource site, and let me go ahead, since I'm looking at it, drop that in there too, both of you. So you can go there. I try not to put too many links, but sometimes when there's like not as many people, I end up sending all these different links. I know it's going to open up a lot of stuff. But this is a place, if you haven't seen it yet, and even if you have seen it, then you'll see that it's been updated quite a bit. But you'll find all the NYC specific information has been posted here. Here is that login message for you, as you can see. But as I scroll down and you see kind of the step-by-step of getting ready, and you can even link to it a little faster from login support. But right under the getting started resources, the login support that's right here, you will see the directions for teachers to be able to log into their account. So you can see either through TeachHub or through Amplify. I'll open this as an example. When you have everything finalized, and I'm saying that because if things are finalized at your school, then this is how you'll access your account for the first time. Even if you accessed your account differently last year, meaning you've already changed your credentials, the first time you access it this year has to be this way or through TeachHub, as you saw the other place. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm scrolling down and you'll notice that you do have to log in with Clever. Right? I wish they could get rid of these twos for you, but it's log in with Clever. Then you'll find your school using your DBN, so your district and then your borough letter and then number, and that generally will be the best way to find your school in the list. Once you do, you'll be prompted to look at these two buttons, and you're going to click on the one that says Clever again. I know this one's the one that teachers go to a lot, and I don't blame you. I'll probably be doing the same thing. But for this one, we have to click on students, teachers, and school staff. And then finally, when you've gotten through that point, you'll be prompted for your username and password, which for the first time, even if you had a different credentials last year because you changed them, but for the first time, you'll log in using your reference ID number as your username and as your password as well. So just keep in mind that that's how you'll access it, and you have to make sure through the person, and they're called different things, that's why I'm not using the name, but there's someone who's in charge of all the rosters and making sure that it's all finalized in stars. And once that occurs, and it's been shared with Clever, sometimes that takes up to 48 hours, then you're able to access your account this way, but you're not sent anything in an email letting you know that. Administrators are not sent anything. Even the tech are not sent anything either. So you may be sitting there thinking, when am I going to be sent this, and not being able to log in. And again, also, even if all of you have all this figured out, if you pass that along to others, that would probably be very helpful for them as well. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind for logging in. And that's really what I mean, by the way, even though I know we have not, just gotten started. If you have questions that are very pertinent to, even accessing the materials as we're going through, then feel free to ask those questions as we're going on. Okay. All right. So hopefully you all have your participant notebooks, and you also have participants, and then you also have access to an account of some sort. And we'll go ahead and we will start, and we'll just go through a few of the initial things, and we'll even talk about the multiple modalities. We'll talk about three-dimensional learning, but again, if we really want to look at the nuts and bolts of the program, then that's perfectly fine with me as well. All right. There's only a few of us, but I'll say, really the most important part here is to remember, even though you're more than welcome to unmute, you feel free to put things in chat. Sometimes you can put a question there, and I'll be able to come back to it a little bit later. And then also others might be able to answer the question as well as you do that. So I definitely want to encourage you to do it. But then also not to feel too overwhelmed with all the note taking and things that seem like I'm giving you an assignment. I really just want you to have an opportunity to explore and ask me questions while you're exploring, which hopefully that will be beneficial to you and a little bit better than just exploring on your own. I can hopefully point you into the directions you would like to go. I've already kind of alluded to this idea, but having the two windows open, even though I have mine example with Google Meets there, but having the Zoom window open and your account open is very helpful as we're going through, because sometimes I'll navigate, but it's a little bit better for you to be able to navigate at the same time if you happen to have those windows open. So just kind of keep that in mind. By the time we're done with this, and it already says 1 hour, although we'll, of course, have that last 30 minutes of time for question and answers, but we're going to build that in throughout as well. But just making sure that we can look at these at-home lessons and see the connections with the multiple modalities, but also the use of the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts, and how we can adapt that over time. And then also, as you see there, looking at those instructional routines that your learners are in a particular instructional context. So we're taking consideration the differing and varying contexts to which you are all in, And you can ask questions specific to that as well as we're going through. And then we have in here some information more specific to the caregiver site and things like that. We may not get into that as much until we go into that last part or the Q&A, but I'll make sure that you have all of the links for the caregiver sites, and then definitely making sure that we have the family overviews, and we have and different ways that we can utilize those. I'll give you a few ideas, suggestions that I've gotten as I've been doing the workshops. All right, so as I mentioned to you before, instead of us doing the Jamboard, since there's only a couple of us so that we don't have to go to another screen, why don't we just take a moment in chat to kind of think about this and add a couple of things in there so that we can all see them. Just thinking to yourself about multiple modalities, three-dimensional learning, and then the Amplify science approach. As it says there, your associations with, but just what is it that you, over time, and really this is giving me some insight into how long you might have been teaching Amplify science, if this is your first year at teaching Amplify science. And then of course, you can also put questions with each one of those things as well, if you like. If you just want to choose one of them to write about in chat, that will be fine. But I would appreciate it, anything, just really telling me what you know about these things. And that helps me also so I don't go over all the things that you are already very familiar with. So just give you a moment to think about it. Denise, I saw you in here. I don't know if you were here when I sent the links for the participant notebook, but I can drop it back in there if you did not get it. I'll put it there right now.
Thanks, Corey.
No problem. Now, if you're, of course, you're welcome. If you're all sitting there thinking that you are brand new to Amplify and none of this is making sense, then you can let me know that too, and I'll go over each one of these things and make sure, because I am going to review it a little bit, but I'll go more in depth if that's something you would be interested in. Thank you, Raphael. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm in just a moment, I'm going to go over the multiple modalities, the three-dimensional learning. We'll go through that a little bit too, a little bit later on, and then the Amplify science approach, which is really those two things working in concert with one another. So I'll go a little bit more in depth with it. All right, thanks, Marguerite. I get that. Okay, so I see. So generally it would be the science teacher back in the classroom, joining you in the classrooms and things like that. So this year you'll be rolling out the Amplify on your own. Okay, so in that case, I'll spend a little bit more time going over that as well. And then you can let me know also, Denise, I'm not sure. And now I guess since two of them would like for me to go over, I'm probably going to go more in depth with it anyway. But at the same time, if you have questions additional to that as I'm going through, just let me know. So let me go ahead and get us started. Since I'm going past the questions, you're more than welcome to ask questions as we're going, but I'll be as cognizant of the time since we're going to go a little bit more in depth with what's going on with the actual approach. So really what you're going to notice then is today I'm talking a lot about the phenomenon-based learning for the Amplify science units. And you will notice, just like in this first unit for first grade, that all of the units are built around a phenomenon, meaning an occurrence, something that has happened. And oftentimes that's put into a real world context. It's fictionalized on purpose, even though it makes real world connections as well. But it also allows for the students to take on roles, like authentic roles of scientists and engineers that they maintain throughout the entire unit as they work within that context and they grapple with the anchor phenomenon, but also different investigation questions that are generated from that, but then also other everyday phenomena that come up as well. So to give you an example, when we're thinking about phenomenon, very basically, one of the things that you can always know when you're reading a phenomenon, because it's a statement, it's an occurrence. So it's going to have that period at the end. Sometimes you'll see that we'll have like even I think on one of the presentation slides we have, we'll put phenomenon, and underneath it there will be questions. The questions are actually phenomenon-based questions, meaning they're generated from it. And the reason it's important is because we have to keep in mind that the phenomenon is something that has happened, something that has occurred. For example, I had a student once come up to me and ask me about, they were brushing their teeth and they noticed that bubbles would start to build up as they brushed their teeth. They observed a phenomenon. They didn't ask the question necessarily, they were just telling me what the phenomenon was, and they were generating from that questions that we had about it. So when we're looking at, for instance, topics that we would generally teach in the past, like you see ocean habitats, electric circuits, mixtures and solutions, even though ocean habitats isn't a great example because students might hear that and be like, ah, that's awesome, that's outstanding. But giving them something more specific from that allows for them to enter into using the multiple modalities, but to specifically collect information from multiple sources so that they can build their explanations over time based on the information that they are collecting. So instead of showing this one, let's look at this next slide. I put this one together for us to see all of the first grade phenomena. So topic-based, maybe we'd say we're going to learn about animals and plants, right? And we know that we're doing animal and plants defenses. However, starting instead with the students and telling them about Spruce the sea turtle that will survive out in the ocean, and then allowing them to know, or allowing them to take on the role of a aquarium engineer, which I'll bring up in a second, will give them something to, as we call it, an anchor phenomenon, anchor to as they're going through the entire context. So the idea here is the Spruce the sea turtle that lives at an aquarium nearby is going to be released out into the wild, and the public is going crazy about this because they're worried that Spruce is not going to be able to protect herself when she's out in the open waters. So with that, the students are asked to generate explanations for the general public that will explain to them how Spruce will be able to take care of herself or defend herself out in the wild, but then also how Spruce's offspring are also going to be able to defend themselves because they'll be taking on a lot of the same traits or inheriting the same traits from Spruce. So even though I'm giving this long story about it, which I will bring up actually back here, or I will bring back up in just a moment, the long story about the whole thing for the students, this gives them an opportunity to enter into that story, right? Like they're a part of the story, keeping in mind that all of the units are built around the NGSS, so therefore they're all a storyline. So they're taking on a role, but they're a character within that story, and then that allows them that more authentic experience when it comes to collecting the information, which is that slide I was about to show you. So keeping in mind that everyone might be a little bit new to this, I will start out there to the left. Now, of course, the three dimensionals, when we're talking about that from the NGSS, I'm going to show you lists of this a little bit later, and you'll notice in that participant notebook, I think it's on page 4, I actually have a reference table for you that has science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts along with the core ideas, or the disciplinary core ideas, so you can check those out. But the idea is that the students are building those skill sets as they're going from lesson to lesson. So they are engaging in using the practices, the science and engineering practices. They're leveraging cross-cutting concepts to be able to make sense of those disciplinary core ideas that are embedded throughout all of the lessons. And then when you're looking at those circles, even though I do have the modalities in one place, but that circle with the eyeball, that represents the phenomenon that I'm talking to you about. Each one of the units having an anchor phenomenon, and that's what you're going to be focused on throughout that entire unit, even though there are other questions that come with it. But it's also connected with other real world scenarios. And what's important to remember is you're really building that context. That's important because with hybrid learning, kind of going into class, but also working remotely, building that context and reminding the students that they've taken on a role and how that role and what they're doing at that day is contributing to the overall story is always an important point to make with your students. No matter what level they're on, really kind of going into that context, making that real for them and allowing them to really take on the role in an authentic manner. I have noticed from classroom to classroom, and even remotely as well, that the students are just much more engaged with what's going on. And I think that you can see how that would naturally occur with that. And then in the middle, even though those two circles are somewhat obscure, the idea is that the students are collecting information from multiple sources using those multiple modalities. So they're doing, they're talking, they're reading, they're writing, and they're visualizing. The doing part a lot of times is connected with the hands-on projects, even though there are other activities the students are doing. As you'll notice, for remote purposes, we do have videos of the hands-on demos for the students, which I will make sure that we go over and check those out. And in the classroom, you have all these materials for them to be able to conduct their own hands-on projects. That could be any type of these inquiry projects that we might have that will be them maybe building something, building a model, perhaps they're doing a card sort, but it gives them an opportunity to do something. But all of that is contextualized with them being able to talk, to discuss things as well, which is one of those things that we really have to think about adjusting as our models have been adjusted as well. And then reading and writing, there's always these opportunities for them to read different things and to write, but not to the point where it's like they're reading the entire time and just writing the entire time, but it is in an authentic manner. It's embedded throughout so that it's a part of the lesson, and the experience they're having is they've taken on that role. And then of course they're going to be visualizing. In the first grade, they don't have the simulations and things like that. They do of course have the text, but we think of the visualizing as more of them being able to use it as a reading comprehension strategy. Like we're reading different things and then we're asking them to visualize. But then I've also noticed that there are a lot of opportunities for them to demonstrate their thinking or represent their thinking to you through drawing and diagramming and even sometimes play acting and things like this. So the idea is not just that the students are able to use the modalities to collect information from multiple sources so that they build an explanation of the phenomenon and they deepen their understanding, but for you as the teacher, this is giving you an insight into each one of these modalities. So you don't have to just leverage reading and writing, or perhaps reading, maybe just talking, for instance. You can really look at it when they're doing things, when they're visualizing. It gives those students the opportunity to represent their thinking through these ways so that when you're assessing what they're doing, we don't have to just leverage what they're reading about, what they're writing really, or what they're talking about. We have these other modalities as well. And then that last circle that you see there is representing a new problem that they will face, or a new context perhaps that they're going to go into, where they will have to use those practices, the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts that they have honed over the entire unit, and be able to grapple with a new problem as they use the multiple modalities as well. So that's a lot, and it's also very quick, and I'm just trying to keep in mind that if we're new, that it's very helpful to go over this, but at the same time, I know that it might have meant not as much as I went through that. So if you have any questions that come up to you right now, feel free to ask right now. I'll give you a moment, and then I'll keep us moving along. But if you think of the questions as we're going, feel free to put those into chat or to just unmute and let me know. All right. So I did mention to you that the students are going to be taking on roles. Here are all the roles from elementary school. What you'll notice, and we actually have these on the resource site right now, which are basically cards in PDF form that you can download, but I'll try to make sure that you get these as well. But what you'll see is that on the front of that card, it tells you the role that the students are going to take on. And then on the back of the card, it gives you some insight or some ideas about what scientists working in that role, approximately that role. You know, there are not a lot of pinball engineers, but they're engineers that work with that. So they give you insight about that. But the idea is to remind you that the students are taking on this role and maintain it throughout the entire unit. And I only say that because sometimes when we think of them taking on roles, we think about that changing from meeting to meeting or day to day. But here they're really taking it on each time, which is important because when you do go into the context, like sometimes you might be working like this, in this case for grade 1, you're working at an aquarium with the students. So that's the context, right? Like they get information from the director of the aquarium, they're asked about different things, and they really are asked to take that role on as they are moving through. So I keep hammering that one home because I have noticed that, of course, in class, it's important for them to know, and I think of those days when they really are looking at the reader and they're having to use that to pick out information. but it's important that they see that what they're doing is collecting that information to connect with the other things that they have done, be it a hands-on project or perhaps some other discussion or model that they put together, whatever it happens to be, that they're able to see that the reading portion is also connected with everything else as well. So you remind them that they're working as aquarium scientists and that they need to collect information in order, and you'll go into what they're doing on that day or whatever it happens to be specifically. But I find that this to be, when we're talking about the multiple modalities, three-dimensional learning, those things are important. But remembering that for those skill sets to build, we have to give them a context for which those skill sets can be practiced in an authentic way, and then therefore they can build over time. So that's why I really focus in on us being able to build that context for the students. And you'll notice with all of the slides, the student-facing slides from the at-home units, but also the in-class slides that are available to you as well, they're really geared toward that, making sure that the students remain engaged in their role, and then also with the context itself. So that's just an important thing to kind of keep in mind. And if you have any specific questions about that, like I said, feel free to let me know, and now we'll talk about it. So again, on page 4, I want to make sure you all have this. This may be the only time, like I'll reference it, but like I said, this might be the only time you want to necessarily go directly to it. Later on, you can go in and put your notes in and things like that. But here you'll see on page 4, I do have the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts listed out. And the idea is that students are developing these practices and these cross-cutting concepts to be able to grapple with these disciplinary core ideas. So I can leverage, for instance, this concept of patterns to make sense of what's going on in a particular situation. Let's say I'm looking at a data set or something along those lines, and I start to look for patterns. I'm utilizing patterns to be able to make sense or to draw a conclusion of what's going on or to make an inference. But on the other hand, thinking of students, thinking of yourself as a teacher, even better. So think to yourself about how you in your everyday life use patterns, like when we used to be able to drive around and things like that. We'd have to understand patterns to be able to follow traffic and all that good stuff. Cause and effect, I can go right back to traffic for that. But thinking of that as a teacher, you look for patterns all the time in the information you're collecting, but also in your classroom. You're looking for certain causes because you can observe the effects. You think about scale, proportion, and quantity a lot. And jumping over to the other side, think about keeping stability and change. Sometimes you want things to remain stable. Sometimes you have to make them change. But you use these concepts to make sense of things. And then the practices up top there, very similar to the cross-cutting concepts. And you can think about this as a teacher as well. You're asking questions all the time, right? You're having to define problems. You certainly have to do that. And really keep in mind, even though those two things go together, when you see an and in the science and engineering practices, the first one generally is associated with science proper. And then the second one is generally associated with engineering, even though you'll see that they both go hand in hand with one another. But then developing and using models, you plan, you carry out investigations a lot. You most certainly have to analyze and interpret information. Using mathematics, computational thinking, you're doing that as well. So we're not just thinking of this as a way to connect the disciplines in the classroom, even though you can do that with these, but also reminding us that students are already doing these things as they enter in the classroom. They're just not necessarily doing them in a really refined manner, and they may not know how to go about it. So we're helping them build these skill sets, and that's really our main focus within the units. And the reason I bring that up is because you'll notice that a lot of the assessments are geared more toward them developing those skill sets, sorry about that, than the actual content itself. So you won't see any multiple choice questions. You won't see any vocabulary tests or anything like that, because it really is about assessing them, building the concepts, but also the practices as well. So when we talk about three-dimensional learning, that's what we are referring to. And everything, including the assessments, are built around the 3 dimensions, where you'll see that there's a focal dimension or a focal science and engineering practice with each one of the units. There's a focal cross-cutting concept. And then, of course, you're focusing in on specific disciplinary core ideas as well. So that's, again, a lot of stuff at one time. And with the 3-dimensional learning, it does, I personally think, take some time, and also seeing it play out in the classroom, as is true with many of the things that we talk about But once you start to kind of see those connections going on, like you'll see an assessment piece that says, I observe the students today as they're playing the survival game and observe whether or not they're able to use patterns to make sense of what they're doing or something along those lines. So the assessment's kind of strange because you're not necessarily asking them about what they're learning that day, but you're really looking at how they're utilizing the concept of patterns and whether or not you can help them refine that a little bit more as well. And it's the same for the other science and engineering practices as well. The disciplinary core ideas are really minimal, even though each one of those, to let you know, are broken out into subsections as well if you haven't seen the NGSS documents. And even though I keep saying the NGSS is, of course, the program is aligned using those gap documents as well that you find on the resource site with the NYSS LS also. It's just when New York adopted the NGSS, they changed it a little bit and added one or two things to the actual standards. But for the most part, this breaks down those disciplinary core ideas for you and gives you an idea. And then really, I always recommend, if you really want to look more and more into these, the NGSS site itself is great for it because you can basically put in the standard and or the three-dimensional performance expectation, whatever it happens to be, and it will take you to a page that gives you all of this information and grade levels specific for you as well. And you'll notice in our actual program, all of this is laid out for you in both the three-dimensional statements, but then also you'll see that the standards are covered in quite a few places on the platform as well. Here are those science and engineering practices, which since I talked about those a little bit, I'm going to go by, but I want you to be reminded that besides that page you can also download a version of these slides from the resource site. So you'll have these as well if you need to share them with others. But also to remind you that teachers a lot of times in the classroom will keep these two things up on the wall. Maybe the disciplinary core ideas, but mainly the cross-cutting concepts and the science and engineering practices. Keeping in mind that at all the grade levels, although I've observed in kindergarten and first grade, you're not expecting them to be perfect when it comes to using this language or being able to use it all the time, but we try to make sure that we use it in our instruction so that eventually, students start to internalize it and recognize it. They associate the practice with what it is that they're doing, or they associate the cross-cutting concept with what it is that they're doing, and they start to use that language as they're talking about things. So that's why we really put the slides in there, just to remind you that it's always good. And I know that virtually or remotely that might be a little bit more difficult, but there might be ways that you can kind of put together things for parents, for instance, or some things along those lines, or reference sheets, even the ones that I sent to you, kind of a reminder of how those things work together. And in this slide, just another reminder really of the students, of course, building that explanation, deepening their understanding. They're always practicing the multiple modalities, even if there's a focus that day. The idea is that they're using these things together in concert to be able to not just do the things that I mentioned before, but if we're talking about tests, more complex text than they would generally be able to access as well. Because a little bit of insight about this, the do talk, read, write, and visualize approach really was built as a reading comprehension strategy, and then was worked into disciplinary literacy as well a little bit later on. And actually the visualize was added by Amplify because of all of the simulations, but then also the other activities that have been put into the grade levels, which really allow the students to visualize or to utilize that strategies to make sense of things as well. So it really allows for a lot of different things. And the reason why I keep saying about that is because taking one of the modalities out of the lessons, for instance, and maybe you'd end up with, let's say, with just them reading and writing, of course, takes away from the coherence of the overall program, but then also it will take away from the coherence from the actual activity instruction as well. Keeping in mind that that little point of them, let's say, using a cross-cutting concept is just a part of a long chain that goes all the way from kindergarten to 8th grade as they're building these over time. So I mean, across the board, one of the great things about the Amplify program, which I know when you're just starting out and you're in the first grade and you're thinking of elementary, you might not think of how it all builds together, but the program itself is built so that kindergarten and all the way to 8th grade, they're affecting each other. There's a unit in kindergarten that's directly connected with one of the 8th grade units. So it's not, it's always something to keep in mind when you're going through the lessons, that you want to make sure that you're maintaining that coherence. And what you'll notice with the at-home or remote resources is that the lessons have been shortened for you. And so therefore you're able to make those decisions on your own, and you're able to maximize, or you're able to make the decisions about the time and maximizing the time without having to decide which things should be removed from the lesson itself. So before I go over to the platform, and I do see the time there, and at 5 o'clock I will do, as I mentioned, I'll tell you, I'll stop and I'll tell you that, it's optional to stay for the rest of the time, but I will continue on because I am going to show you next the platform, and then I'm going to go into the at-home resources, which are the remote resources. But I try to take my time with that, because if you're new to this, then one, it's important to keep them separated. And two, it is sometimes difficult to keep them separated when you're first starting out. So I want to make sure that we're able to do that. But if you have any questions, we can take a moment for that. Feel free to ask now. You can unmute or put that into chat. That'll be fine.
Corey, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you, Raphael. How's it going?
I was just wondering how it's written, because one of the problems I have with a lot of teachers that I try to explain to them is that science is a technical genre, and it's not written like science, it's like fiction or realistic or autobiography. It's a different genre, different grammar, different vocabulary. Has this stuff been written in the same style as most technical books in science, or has it been made more friendly for especially first graders who are just learning how to read?
Yeah. So I can answer that in a couple of different ways, because that's a great question, first of all. What I'll mention to you is I do think that yes, the program has been designed in such a way, like I know you hear me talking about it being an authentic experience and things like this, but for the most part, I have noticed that it is, in my mind, very age appropriate, meaning it builds in a lot of kind of games or models as games. It builds in a lot of things where the students may have had experiences that they can connect with what's going on. And then the writing itself, as you'll notice, some of the readers are actually written as like a fictional book or a reader of that point. And there's only one reference book, which is more like the kind of traditional science books that we usually get. Now, with that said, however, I will say that sometimes when talking with teachers, they oftentimes will remark on how the Lexile levels may be a bit higher than what they generally will have in grade 1. And the reasoning behind that, because we don't level out our texts, and we have verbiage all over the place that says why we don't level them and all this stuff. But I'll tell you that the idea is that our program is set to really support the building of literacy skills. And one of the research bases that we look at is actually from Tim Shanahan and his group that really discussed the idea that students should be grappling with text above their level multiple times a week. So it is set up so they're working together in groups grappling with the text. And so therefore the issue is going to be that while that's set up that way, because like I've been to classes where maybe the students are having a really difficult time reading the book, and I've even noticed the teachers which will stop the class and not let the students go on until that's over. Well, that is not the case. The program's not built for them to have to be able to read each thing. You'll notice that we have embedded audio in all of the readers. We have them in both English and Spanish. We have read alouds on YouTube of all of the books as well, because the idea is that, sometimes they'll go to class, they'll be looking at one paragraph from the reader that's assigned that day. They're grappling with just that one paragraph, but that's really at the level that they're at that time. And then we move on, and maybe we'll play the audio for everything else. So I think it's written for them. I think it's age appropriate. But the thing that I think that you'll get asked about is probably about the Lexile level of the actual readers themselves, which again are a bit higher. And it can be a struggle. And I definitely think that one of the issues we're going to face is that we're not going to be able to have partner reading, at least not in the same way that we have it in the program as it is. So we'll have to develop a few different strategies. But again, there are several embedded strategies for the actual readers themselves. And I hope I'm not going too much on a tangent with that. And I'm going to show you these things as well so that we can find the resources. But I hope that's specific to your question. All right. So what I'll do, and again, just feel free to unmute. I see the time as well. I am now going over to the actual site. Something that you may notice that starts to pop up is there are these new beta units that are going to be put on there. I'm only bringing it to your attention because you'll be sent information about it, and it'll tell you that you're more than welcome to try out our new beta version. But if you're brand new, learning how to do the one version and then going to the beta version, like these, that would be a difficult thing to do. So I say, you know, until you get to the point where you feel a little bit more confident with the overall program, maybe don't go into the beta version, not to mention that's going to be the second unit anyway. But I'm putting it out there because it's going to start to be listed, and I don't want you to be freaked out about that. So first thing I'll do is I'll click in on animal and plant defenses, which is really our first unit that we're looking at. And I'm not going to, you know, we don't have a lot of time to go over every single thing, but down here is where you're going to find all of the unit materials. Here, you'll find all the printable resources. One of the cool things that they have added this year is this new 3D assessment objective. So it will give you a breakdown of all the assessments and how that is associated with the 3 dimensions, the ones that we just went over. So you can check that out. It'll be right there at the top of resources. You'll also notice, since we're thinking about the 3D, all the 3D statements are very helpful. You'll notice that there's one for the unit, there's one for each chapter, but then for each lesson, you'll also find one. And this is what I was telling you about. It's much more like a performance expectation, keeping in mind, if you happen to be new to the standards, a performance expectation, or the standards as they're written here, takes in 3 parts. It's not just the content itself. That's the disciplinary core idea. But it also will weave in the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concept as well. And that's what we call the performance expectation. Our 3D statements are very much like those, but written in a way that I think helps you break down the lesson so that you see, for instance, like you, of course, keep in mind, you have the color coding up here. So you see that the practices are going to be highlighted in blue. And then you see the disciplinary core ideas in orange or red. And then you see the green will be cross-cutting concepts. That helps you break down and see which ones are a part of each one of those lessons, okay? So that's for the 3D statement. The 3D assessment objective, which I don't think is going to open another window. Good, it does. This will actually break down for you, as you see, and show you the actual performance expectation, the science and engineering practice, the disciplinary core idea, and the cross-cutting concepts. And then you notice that it breaks it down by the activities for you here as well. And this, by the way, is connecting it with the different assessment pieces that take places there. This is a brand new thing. I only say that to you because if you happen to work with teachers that have been doing this for a while, you might want to point this out to them, because I'll let you know that we're asked about this a lot, which is where most of our things that we add come from, is from feedback that we get from teachers. So that's brand new this year for the 3D assessment objective. Back to a more, something that's a little bit more important when it comes to preparing. Something that might help you all is the offline guide. When you select the offline guide, it's going to open up in a new tab, and it will hopefully open up a new tab. It's going to give you the option to download everything from your unit to your computer. So you don't have to, for instance, let's go to 1.3 here. I won't have to go to that unit and download this PowerPoint. I won't have to download these videos, none of these PDF, that's what these are. And then also the projections. All of that will be downloaded to my computer, and they will be put in a well-organized folder that looks very much like this, depending on how you have your aspects. And you'll have everything you need right there for you on your desktop or wherever you put it on your computer. And even though that was important in the past for, let's say, when I open this up, you don't want to download the classrooms. Like maybe you lost connectivity at school, you'd have the videos and the PowerPoint. But also now you have the file. So like this video file will be there. Let's say you want to share that with a student or maybe a parent. You can share it. If you're using Google Classroom or whatever it happens to be, you can send it right there. You have all these files that you can share. And that makes it, I think, a little bit easier for communication when it comes to working with the parents as well. So that is, again, the offline guide. Just click on that, it'll download everything. It's one of those things you might have to explore a little bit afterwards, but I think you'll find it to be very helpful to you as you're getting started. And then I'm going to click into chapter 1. Keeping in mind that that first unit is a pre-unit assessment. but all of the assessments are embedded within activities. You can see that first 1.1 actually also has a hands-on activity when they're playing what we call the survival game, which is actually a model that the students are going to be developing over time, but they think of it as a game. So you'll notice a couple of things that will help you, particularly if you're working remotely as well. All of the PowerPoints have been put into Google Slides now. So you can get these here, but they won't be in that downloaded folder that I mentioned to you, because you know they're all on the cloud-based server and you have to ask permission for them, and they're actually sent to your email once you use these. But you'll still see all the things you need are right here. All the materials, the differentiation that you need to know about for that specific lesson, all listed out here for you. It's very important because differentiation is not found in our at-home lessons. The idea is that you can look at the at-home lessons and then come to this. And by the way, anytime I say the in-class lessons, I am talking about the program as is. So this teacher's guide as is, what we're looking at right now. This is what's different than the at-home resources, which I'll go to in just a moment. But you'll notice, again, you have all the things that you need here. And then when you click into these, you'll have step-by-step. It'll give you some ideas, some things you can do. But let's say you're not interested in that. The one reason I'm showing you this is because these teacher support tabs are a wealth of very important and useful information. And I know that in a sea of information, which is what our teacher's guide is like, because it has so much information, sometimes it's difficult to pick out which things will be most useful. But from me, I'm letting you know that I think that the information that you find in the teacher support tab, which is only found here, I think that you'll find it to be very helpful to you, not just when you're adjusting lessons, but differentiating as well and making other connections for your students. I think you'll find that to be helpful. So that again is very quick, me going over what the actual in-class program is. And when I'm talking about that again, I am talking about this. If we went out and looked at our 3 units, that's what I'm referring to for in-class. Now, this next part, I'm going to go to the at-home resources. So what you'll have to do is go to our global navigation, which by the way, right here it is. It's always there. It doesn't matter where you're at on our teacher's guide. You'll always find that tri-bar drop down. You can go in and check out the account settings as well. Later on, that might be something a little bit more important to check out. But as you scroll down, you'll notice you don't have a mess in there like mine. You will see the simulations there. But eventually you'll get down to the bottom and you will find something that looks like this, and it's called the Program Hub. You click on that, and that's going to open up in a brand new window. Okay. When it does, you will see that there is an I am a leader, which is really for administrators. I should say administrator. I mean, everyone's a leader. But you're more than welcome to send that to your administrator if they're having issues with the program as well, because then they're able to get in there and it gives them specific things to look at. But for us, we're clicking in on I am a teacher. And hopefully, even though, as you'll notice, the Program Hub is being widely used right now, so I think it has a lot of traffic. And I will say at this time that it is 5 o'clock, so it is the last 30 minutes is optional. So of course I say that knowing that you may want to stay for the rest of the part, but if you need to leave, I wanted to mention that to you. I am just going to go over the at-home resources fairly quickly, and then we'll use the rest of the time for you to ask as many questions as you like. Or if you'd like me to go and show you other things, I can do that as well. All right, so the Remote Learning in Amplify 1, let me tell you, if you're new to the program, which is what I'm getting here, if you want, on the time, when you have a bit more time, going to using this site for self-study, I'm actually going to go ahead and open it up for us. This will be extraordinarily helpful for you. And relatively speaking, it's not as time consuming as, let's say, going through every single one of our documents and getting an idea of what the program or how the program is working. Here you can see navigation, like I did really quickly. This will give you a nice overview of it. Here, navigation and logging in. Here you can see for planning purposes how you use the unit level. So it'll go through all the unit level stuff. And this, by the way, these are videos which will be timestamped for you, so you can just look for specific things as well. And then K5 lesson level will go all the way to the lesson level, give you a bit more information of those things. Unit orientation video. Let me go ahead and open the Grade 1 Animal and Plant Defenses. It's only, I think, around 6 minutes long. But the thing that you want is this that comes with it. You, of course, watching the video is important too. But right underneath it, you'll see this new unit guide. The unit guide breaks down that entire unit for you in about 5 pages. Very helpful. Not only does it break it down, but it uses this key for the activities and all that good stuff, and gives you the time stamps that go along with this. So you can see day 1, day 2, day 3. This is how the program would be if you were in class and you were teaching science, well, either every day or 3 times a week or something along those lines. I know it doesn't always work out that way. But this also shows you where the assessment pieces are. And then you go on to that next one, and it'll show you what chapter 2 looks like and how it builds together. You can see over here what the students investigate, what they figure out, how they figure it out. I find that this document is very useful. So again, it's right underneath the unit orientation videos, and you'll find it right there, that unit guide. And I find that they'll be very, very helpful to you. And then everything else there, as I go down through here, and again, not a lot of time to look at all of that, but it's all there to help you get more oriented with the program, even those that have been working with the program for some time. And the only reason I would even mention it is because when it comes to time, which is very important, obviously, when you're teaching, this is going to help you a little bit more, I think, than if you were to go through all the documents and things like that. These videos and going from step by step will really help you out, and I think you'll notice that it does it in a very intuitive manner. So I'm going back really quickly here to the remote learning that you'll find right at the top. One of the very cool things that has just happened is that this has been broken down now. You'll see that there's a New York City specific over here for 6th, 7th, and 8th. It's not that you wouldn't, it's just that the nation follows exactly the same scope and sequence that you follow, so therefore a new one did not have to be made. But for you though, you'll notice that sometimes we'll come over here and you'll think, where's the New York stuff for these grade levels? But everything is fine as is right here. It doesn't have to say NYC. So I'll go ahead and click on grade 1. And I want to remind everyone that I'm no longer on the teacher's guide, that I opened up the program guide, and that opens up in a completely different tab, okay? When I scroll down, what you're going to find are our at-home unit resources. Here they'll be listed. I'm going to come back to those in a second. And then you're also going to find, which I think is going to be very helpful, the new at-home videos as well. Now, the difference between the two. The videos are the lessons as they would be in class. So for 1st grade, those would be 60-minute lessons. What you will notice is that they are broken out into these YouTube playlists, which you could basically, as you see, associate with the activities themselves. Okay, so you see that this is 1.1 for that one, but it's breaking it all the way down. So what I'm going to do to show you what I mean by that, I'm going back over here. Remember, we were on 1.1. And you will see that what they're showing you is that these activity boxes are aligning with the parts of the videos that you see here, and it's broken down for the students in that way. And what you'll notice, some cool things about it is sometimes it'll have the project, and the teacher that's teaching the lesson will have a new way to demo the project, will suggest materials to the students. But you may not necessarily want to use the video all the way through, because it is another teacher. Also, another cool thing is that all the videos, all the materials, by the way, will be in Spanish. But for the videos themselves, you may want to just use 1 or 2 parts of it. You know, you might have the students just look at so-and-so, and it's on YouTube, by the way, all of the things, because I know that's a difficult thing on campus. But the reason why is because it's accessible via smartphone, which all of a sudden opens up technology access a little bit more for students. Not to say that every student has access to a smartphone, but a few more students will have access to that than they may have to computers, laptops, things like that at home. And you can also send these videos to parents, for instance, because just below, what you're going to find is right here in this box, and it's easy to overlook. You can see I did it. Animal and Plant Defenses Read Aloud Videos. So when I click on that, another YouTube playlist will open up, and what you'll see is that all 5 of the readers are represented from this grade 1 Animal and Plant Defenses, and it will be someone reading the books out loud to the students. So I find that this being one option that you can do, and this again is put into YouTube because then it can be accessed via smartphone. Let's say a parent's like, well, what are you reading in class? You could send this link directly to them, and they're able to access that on their smartphone. They know what you're reading that day, or they can go over it with their students if they would, or with their kids if they would like to. And that does remind me as we go back. So these are all the videos, okay? And I'm writing down now because I don't want us to get confused, but I'm going to make sure you know how the students access the e-readers as well, which is a part of the actual teacher's guide. So I'll go back to that in a second. Your other option, not to say that the videos couldn't go along with it, but remember these are the lessons as is, except for a few things that have been changed for remote learning, which by the way is a great way that you can look at that and gives you a model of what a lesson might look like remotely as well. I think that's very helpful teaching wise. But then up here is where you will find the actual at-home resources or units, the at-home units. You have different options for this. So first, if you have students that have very little access to technology, like very limited at home, they're not going to, and by the way, all of these are really designed for asynchronous learning, even though you'll see that there's things in the actual teacher overview where you can maximize your synchronous time. But if you have students that have no access to technology or very limited access to technology, then the thing that right now we're calling the packet, even though we're thinking about, you know, this maybe being switched up for the next unit, but right now the print-based option, so these two things are not connected, it's two different versions of the same thing. And I'm just making this point because I get a lot of emails about this. So right here, when I open up the packet, and remembering this is something that you kind of imagine, I'll even open it up in the Google Sheets. We'll see if it does it fast enough. It's always going to make you make a copy, but then it'll be in your account and you'll be able to utilize it. Let's see that it has slowed down a little bit, but it opens up. I open it up this way. Keep in mind that now what I can do is edit everything, right? The packets are designed so that I'm going to print them out, give them to the students, send them to the students, thinking that they're not going to be able to watch the videos. They're not necessarily going to be able to access anything else that goes along with it. So it'll actually carry them through everything. They don't need the slides. They don't need anything like that. It takes them step by step through each one of the lessons. It even points out the modalities there. But the great thing about the Google Sheet is before you send it to your students or print them out, you can go in and change all of these things to the way to be more specific to your students if you would like. So that gives you that option for the packet. But that, again, when I say the packet, that's really what I am referring to, because, one thing that I will mention about it that's great for technology, I'm seeing if there's an example here. If there happens to be a video or something along those lines, I don't think there is one in this packet, but if there happens to be one, they'll write the words optional and it'll give a link to that video. Meaning that if the students had the printed out form, but let's say they did have access to a smartphone, maybe one of their parents had it or someone that they're living with has it, then they might be able to use a smartphone to access the video. But again, it'll break down the video for them, and keeping in mind that they may not be able to access it, okay? So that's the packet, which I am gonna go ahead and close out. I wanna make sure that we keep that separate. That's all on its own. You can get the whole compilation right up here. You can see PDF, then also Google for Spanish as well. If your students have access to technology and you're still working asynchronously and you're using Google Classroom, even though you don't have to for this, although it works really well for it, then what your students are going to need are what we call the at-home slides and the at-home sheets. Okay? Right down here, these are broken down by lesson for you. Here, you'll notice you can get the compilation of both. It's really up to you. At first, we had just the compilations, but so many teachers requested that they be broken down. We broke them down into the table as well. And I already, over here, have some open for us, but I opened up the slides and the student sheets for lesson 2. So let me go to lesson 2 real quick. Let me first show you the sheets. So the idea would be the students would have these sheets that go along with the student slides you're going to send them. If for some reason you are working with Google Classroom, then you're able to generate a different copy for every student when you're making the assignment. Meaning you make your one copy the way you want it or just keep it as is. And then when you assign it to them, you have that option to generate a copy for every student that can be sent to them. I know in grade 1 that might not be ideal and might not be exactly what you're looking for, but you'll also notice, I think this is great, that in the student sheets, they're very simplified, keeping that grade level in mind. And they borrow more from the slides than they do from the sheets. Sometimes, and this is important to note, in kindergarten and first grade, there won't even be a student sheet for them. It'll just be the slides. So let's say they have this one sheet there, right? Then they would actually have the slides that are facing them, meaning it's written toward or for them. Now, I say that, keep in mind our last discussion, you can go through and you can edit all of these before sending them to the students, and you can generate their own copies for this as well, because these are the student facing slides. These are different than those in-class slides that we see on the teacher's guide. So they would have a file with the sheets, but then that would go with the slides. So I always think to myself, sheets and slides going together, they have to have those together unless there isn't a student sheet. And then I also opened up lesson 3. I did that because I wanted to bring to your attention that, let's say they're in present mode, all the videos that you would usually see in class are put there as well. And then if there is a hands-on project, even though I don't think I have one open, generally that YouTube video to that hands-on project for the students will be connected for them, right? So if they're doing a card sort, or they're playing the, they're actually playing the game, then there could be a YouTube video linked there for them. And let's say it's not, right? So we have our student sheets and things like this. You as the teacher, there's one thing that you could do back on the program hub. You will notice that there's this button, hands-on investigation support, right? That's just below what we were just looking at, but it's going to take me to a different screen. So I open that up, and this will show me the lists that are already created for the hands-on projects. If I open this up, another YouTube playlist, I know it's a lot, but the YouTube thing has really worked out quite well when it comes to students being able to access this in different ways. But what you'll see is that we have a video for all the hands-on projects. I know it's not ideal. We would prefer that all the students be able to do them. But let's say the students are, maybe they opted not to come to class, or they're just not able to do the project, or we can't enter into it. Then you have these videos that you can show the students. But then also, I think that in the future, like let's think about students that are missing class. All of these videos, resources are going to be very helpful. Instead of you having to go back over the lesson, you could give them the 1.1 entire lesson video. Instead of having to go over the hands-on, again, you could provide them with the hands-on video and let them look that over. I know in grade 1 that wouldn't necessarily be what you wanted to do, but you could also look at it multiple times. Think about what you're seeing and observing before even entering in to the project. So these are helpful, and I think, and the reason why I bring it up is, let's say that I want to copy this, and maybe I'm not going to put the whole, and paste it instead, but let's say I copy the actual list itself. If I wanted to, I can actually put the video, and I would put the actual video in back here on the student slides before they even go into that project. So if they are actually working on that project that day, which of course I'm looking down through here to see if they happen to have anything about it, they may have images and things going on, but I might also want to go ahead and link the YouTube video there of the hands-on project if it has not been linked yet. I only say that because on occasion with the major projects, you'll notice that they have been linked into the slides already. So I know for a fact that that's a lot of stuff, but to be real simple about it, as simple as I can be, you just have to kind of make this decision based on the model or the actual instructional model that you're in right now, the amount of time that you have, because another great thing about the at-home units is that they're all cut in half time-wise, right? So I'm going to go back to those really quickly, kind of show you what I mean by that. 2 different ways we can look at this. A little bit of lag time. Let me look here. First, the teacher overview, which I'm only going to open up in PDF right now. You can open up and change that up in Google Sheets as well. The teacher overview is very helpful. It's succinct compared to other documents that you might look at. It takes you, it connects you with other resources as you're going through here. Like right there, you see at-home unit pacing. You'll also see synchronous and asynchronous learning. But here, very important, adapting the Amplify science approach for remote learning, meaning how do we adapt the multiple modalities, use the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts in a remote learning setting or even a hybrid setting. Hands-on activity options, we talked a little bit about that. The classroom wall options, which we're not going over in great detail, but in this document, it will give you some information about that. And then you'll also notice on the presentation that you find on the resource site, they have some information about that as well. But as I keep going down through here, what you'll eventually see is that all the lessons, instead of being 60 minutes, are now 30 minutes long. And the decisions don't have to be made by you, but instead, those who designed the original curriculum the learning design group at the Lawrence Hall of Science, they went through and they made all of the strategic decisions so that they can, one, shorten it and make it more appropriate for remote and hybrid learning, but then also be able to maintain the coherence of the program as well, which really sometimes that takes having an overarching picture of that when you're going in and making those changes. But you'll see that here, it'll break down the lesson very succinctly for you. You can compare this back to the teacher's guide where you see those little activities. And then it also lists out for you what lesson this is adapted from. Now, that's great, and this is very helpful to you, and I, of course, recommend that you look at the teacher overview. It's very helpful. But next to the teacher overview is this new thing that we just put there called the lesson index. This is the thing that I would recommend you download it, print it out maybe. I don't know if people still print things out. I print things out all the time to write on them. But this basically, if you've decided to do the at-home units, and let's say you're working with multiple teachers on the at-home units, this allows you to know which one of these are directly connected, or which of the at-home lessons is directly connected to the in-class lessons, which I've said that wrong twice, but you get my idea. You see that at-home lesson 2 is actually a combination or an adaptation of 1.2 and 1.3. That's important because when you're thinking of things like differentiation, when you're looking for certain materials perhaps even, you'll want to go back to 1.2 and 1.3 on the actual teacher's guide and look for those things on the lesson level, because that's the only place that they're put there, because really the at-home resources are designed asynchronously. But what I was going to say is they're not designed for teachers who have taught before, but I've noticed that it takes sometimes for granted that you may have taught an in-class lesson before. So when you're looking at it, you have to keep that in mind, that you have to kind of go back and forth between the index. If I'm on at-home lesson 7, then I'm looking in at lesson 2.3 back here on the actual site. So I'll go to 2.3 really quick. And when I go there, that's where I'm going to see, I can compare how it's been changed, first of all, because I can see the original activities. But then I also find my differentiation here, right? Because I see the supports for diverse learners, but then I'll see my potential challenges in the lesson. I'll see the specific differentiation for strategies for English learners, and then for those students who need more support and those students who need more of a challenge. But this is important because let's say you're working with someone who's like brand new to the program. They may not see the differentiation because it's not back on the at-home units. The idea is that we are using this index to be able to find the information that we need on the actual teacher's guide, which I know is not ideal. But for the most part, the idea is that we're keeping the resources separate, because if we put them onto the teacher's guide, I do think it will become even more of a complication. So for now, this is really the best way I can think of for you to be able to find the different parts that go along with the at-home lessons, but also to be able to make sense of which lessons have been omitted perhaps, or which ones have been adapted, which activities have been taken out. And I think that it's also, if you're just starting out, will give you a way to think about how these classes might look more in class, because you look at them and you'll know what's missing, what's different. And a lot of the times it's because that hands-on project, for instance, might have been removed because it just isn't something that we can do online. And perhaps there's a video there for them, but it's something that's not included within the sequence anymore. So that is here on the Program Hub. You have your choice of the at-home units, or just below that, the at-home videos. And it's not to say that those things can't work together. It just takes a little bit more thinking and connecting them through. And then, of course, just below that, you have the read alouds, which is going to prompt me to do the last thing, which I know I have taken up all the time. I am going to go back out to the actual teacher's guide. Just trying to make that clear because I know I'm going from tab to tab. So I'm out here in the teacher's guide. Keep in mind that your students all log in, and if you need it, I can send this to you as well, but it's on how students log in is right underneath the instructions on the resource site where you find how you log in. But when they do, this is basically what they are going to see, meaning that you've given them the Amplify Science login, which, by the way, I think it's NYC1, and the password is Science1, and it's the same for all students everywhere, by the way. So, or everywhere in the city, I should say. What they will see when they log in is this page will open up for them. And hopefully if they're going through their grade level page, they'll only see the 3 units for their grade level. When they do, they'll click on their grade, and that's where they're going to find the things that are available to them. This is important for kindergarten, first grade. If you're working for other teachers that maybe worked with it last year, this did not exist for kindergartners and first graders last year because books were not included on the student apps page. Only for those upper grade levels that we have the modeling tools and the simulations. But this year, all of the books have been put in their e-reader form for the grade levels on the elementary apps page, which for me is a huge deal because, you know, going through a year without them being able to do that is not easy. But now they'll be able to do that. So that's why it's important to make sure that even the younger students are able to log in and parents have their login information, because then they could come in. And I will let you know, if you don't have the Spanish license for your school, you may not have the Spanish books there, but you will if you do have the license. But for instance, I'll open up Frog Models. And by the way, this is a good way for you to be able to go through and kind of review the text as well. This will bring you, and it always lets you know, by the way, where the books are going to come up. I'll show you where you can find that as well. But here, it doesn't have like a great amount of functions, but the best functions are when you open it up and eventually a little speaker will appear right here. And this would be, if this is my English book, it'll be in English. If it's Spanish, it'll be in Spanish. But this will play the audio for this page. The students can actually change the speed if they like, but they can play the page, you know, over and over again as many times as they like. So the e-reader function has been improved this year because last year the audio was not embedded. This year it is there. So now they have those YouTube videos of the books, which is a person who's reading the book to them. But you also have that option to give them the login so that they can come in and see their books and then listen to the audio as it's going through as well. So you have that option. And the last thing I want to show you is, for me, the time flies by. For you, I'm sure that that's not quite the same. On materials and preparation. Seems strange right now to look at that. But as I scroll down, there's a list of the books right here. And you will see where those books are going to occur lesson-wise. I bring that up because it is the only place that you will find that under materials and prep. So you will know, like you can write a little note on the outside of each one of the books, or you could just print this out, which is what I do. I'll know that when I get to 1.3, I'm going to need spikes, spines, and shells. Right? That's going to be one of those things that I need. So that's just one of those kind of things that come a little bit later, but I think it'll be helpful right now as you're trying to kind of find the things that you need to put into place. All right, so for all of you that stayed for even this last optional time, even though you're supposed to have 30 minutes for questions, how about 6 minutes for questions? So any questions you have, or even if you want me to go back, and I'll stay on as long as you need me to, by the way, to make sure that you can find the things that you need. Marguerite, I'm very pleased to hear that, and I do remember you saying that before. I do think that you will find that the at-home resources, if you're using Google Classroom, are very helpful, and if not, the videos actually are helpful. I've had mixed reviews from teachers when it comes to the lesson at-home videos, and I think it's probably because it is another teacher. On the other hand, sometimes when you have a synchronous time and you only can talk to teachers or to students for a few minutes, then the video itself is pretty good because they can see the lesson, and then using a few minutes that you're talking to one another, if you have that time, because not everyone does, you're able to then talk about the lesson itself. You can just maximize your time by going in and picking the lesson apart and kind of thinking of it that way. You don't have to teach the lesson within that time. You get my meaning on that. For the students, let me actually, I'm going to send, even though I'm going to show you where you can find it as well, I'm going to open it up and send you the direct link. So K5 students right here, share student logins, log in with Amplify. And let me actually go ahead, copy, paste this for you. So what you'll notice is that you just send them this login, although I'll be very honest with you, the other login or the other address works as well, so it doesn't have to be quite that long. But the thing about students is that they do not log in with these other two things, and that's what causes the most confusion, usually. And I would think at this time, you're really talking about parents and caregivers and things like that, which I realize we didn't get a lot of time to talk about that. But when they do, they log in with Amplify, and I'm saying that because if you do it one time, usually they'll stay logged in. And then here you'll see that their username is their grade level, so NYC1, and then the password Science1, which is changed from last year. I'll put that out there. And then you can log in. I'll let you know, like even if you're having trouble accessing your account right now, you can, as soon as we're done, or right now if you wanted to, you can go here and access this just like a student would. It will open for you. I tried it before I came here. And you'll be able to see what your students will see when you share it with them. So you're able to go ahead and do that. This part is not attached to your rosters because it is a general shared login for all the students in New York City. And that, even though that sounds like that's a lot on one login, I'll let you know that the country uses a different one, but New York City being so big, they have their own, and it works really well, even with the shared login. I haven't had a lot of issues with that. All right, so I'm hoping that that will work for you. Any other questions with our last couple of minutes that we have here? Also, don't want to hold you past the time.
Corey, can you go back to the teacher login? I got in a little late.
Sure, no problem at all.
And
So
thank you. This has been great, most helpful.
I'm very glad. I'm glad. And thank all of you, by the way, for coming here this afternoon. I know it's not easy to do, but right here, now I'm going to actually put the address again for everyone. This is the resource site, and it is updated a lot. I know there's a lot of links and things like that, but it's one of those that's like really worth going through when you have a little bit more time, because they'll put a lot of resources that are helpful. All the gap documents and things are found here. But right here, and it's just me scrolling down through the main first part. I'm getting to the getting ready or getting started resources. Right here, classroom teachers login, you will see that there's the one for Amplify, which I'll open that one. But then also recently added, the Teacher Hub has been put there as well, which I'm a little bit less familiar with, I'll be honest with you, because this is a new one, and maybe all of you who are using this are much more familiar with it. But on the other one, and I did go too far on that, this one is the one that's generally used. So that's the one I go over most often. But just again, you'll log in with Clever as a teacher. You'll look for your school's DBN. Remember, it's just the district number, the borough letter, and then the school number. That should find your school. I say that because I've done this in person with people, and sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to get to it. Sometimes you have to put the name in. But then you'll see here that you're going to click on student, teachers, and school staff. And that'll take you to this final one for username and password, which this one is confusing, and this is for everyone for the first time you're accessing, or even if it's the first time this year accessing it. It's your employee ID number, which I have been told is the number that you find on your paycheck, and it's both your username and your password. And once, like if you wanted to try this once we got off of this, if everything's been finalized in STARS and they've gone through and licensed you, you may not even necessarily be aware of that. But try to log on this way, and if you're able to log in, you know that all your rosters are finalized and your account is active. If it says that it doesn't find your account, don't try to like go through like the other things, you know, it might say put your email in, all this different stuff. You just know at that time it hasn't been activated, and what you need to do is to contact your administrators or those that are working with the rosters and STARS, and they actually have to then contact core curriculum, which I'll point out one more time, and I'll actually put this on here as well. I realize that that time is right at it. But here is that message, which is on, it is also on there on the resource site. So it's going to go right below this. What you'll notice is you'll open that message up. Just send, you can send that message along, but at the top of the message itself, it will tell you the core curriculum information, and it'll tell you that for all accounts, inquiries to at this time to talk to them, because really when it comes to purchasing and all those things, everything goes through core curriculum, and then it comes to us, just like that information goes through Clever and then comes to us. So I'm just giving you the faster way to be able to do it. All right. Of course, no problem, Raphael. Of course.
So I just want to, I think that, you know, we are
we want to respect everybody's time, especially yours, Corey. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Corey, again, for always going up and beyond and sharing your expertise with the Amplify Science. So hopefully everybody was able to, gain some knowledge about Amplify and being able to support your students. Just want to make sure that everybody